China fumed as a British warship transited the international waters of the Taiwan Strait on June 18th for the first time in 4 years. The UK said the passage fully complied with the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. It comes as Japan is also increasing its transits in line with US freedom of navigation operations through the Taiwan Strait. But how is this linked to a proposed change in Taiwan's Cross-Strait Act, an amendment that civic groups have raised concerns about? Are those fears substantiated, and what internal divisions does this indicate Taiwan suffers from? Is China always the winner if Taiwan is divided, and how can the nation overcome this? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Yin Khvat. Joining us today are Julien Oeuillet, IPON, Indo-Pacific Open News founding editor, and also Radio Taiwan International, host of Taiwan versus the World. We also have Raymond Sung, Prospect Foundation Vice President, and Wang Kaijun, Kuomintang KMT Department of International Affairs Assistant Director. A warm welcome to everybody to Taiwan Talks today. June 18th marked the first time since 2021 that a British warship transited the Taiwan Strait, with China's military saying it tracked the vessel throughout. Days earlier, a Japanese warship also passed through, taking several hours to transit. It was the second Japanese sail through this year and the third since September 2024. Julien, let me ask you first. So what signal does this UK transit make?
These transits are always done by countries friendly to Taiwan to show not necessarily supporting Taiwanese independence, but to show that they at least oppose China's control over the strait. They are always very measured. It's always like one warship, so it's not exactly a military exercise or anything. Coming from the UK, this is especially interesting considering the number of controversies right now in the UK when it comes to Chinese influence, specifically with the mega embassy. So coming from the UK of all NATO countries, that's quite significant. And
Raymond, ahead of the NATO summit, the Secretary General there, Mark Rutte, he expressed concern for Taiwan's situation amongst China's aggressions. And he said something that was quite interesting. He said that if the US is legally obliged to support or defend Taiwan in a crisis, that NATO as an alliance has no opt-out clause. What did you make of that?
Firstly, that indicates the interconnectivity of the Atlantic NATO theater and the Indo-Pacific theater, and we do see that the security situation is connected together because of that Taiwan is a friendly country to the NATO democracies, and also because of a China-Russia alliance. So any situations happening in one theater will be causing some repercussions for another one. And also that indicating to the openness of the Taiwan Strait is also a global economy situation. So any contingency will cost the global economy in trillions of dollars worth. So that's why for defending their own interests of NATO country, you cannot be siding aside from the Taiwan contingency.
Stephen, for you, was it basically NATO saying, or the Secretary General of NATO, saying that they would have to defend the US because of that Article 5 in NATO?
The premise of the question comes up to, a lot of times it's a very controversial debate. You know, what is the preconditioning activating Article 5, right? There was only one incident happened is when the United States has deemed a very serious terrorist attack as a official attack onto NATO, so they activated Article 5. So the interesting question will be, what are the sort of casualty estimates that will perhaps invoke Washington in saying that, perhaps it is time to activate Article 5. So I think it's very interesting that NATO is thinking about this question, but it's also a very timely moment to start thinking about this question.
Okay, now Taiwan opposition lawmaker Chen Yongkang has proposed an amendment to Article 29 of Taiwan's Cross-Strait Act, replacing the Defense Ministry as the authority over waters around Jinmen and Lianchang counties with the Ocean Affairs Council. Now, civic groups have criticized the move, saying it could reframe cross-strait issues as an internal civil conflict and redefine the Taiwan Strait as internal waters. Opposition lawmakers say this would not be possible, and to say so would be going too far. Now, Taiwan and the US and its allies maintain that the strait is international waters beyond Taiwan and China's territorial seas. China claims the Taiwan Strait is its internal waters. So, Stephen, as a representative for the KMT, I wondered if you could help to explain the reasons behind that proposed change.
Well, absolutely. I think, the party's reactions, I think, is very reasonable. One of the things that Admiral Chen was actually concerned with is this issue of, number one, right? This idea about prohibited and restricted water. The nature of that, is it for maritime policing? Is it for maritime sort of regulation, kind of controlling, or is it for military conflict? The same situation happened, for example, in the Spratly Island in the year 2000, where the Republic of China has just recently created a Coast Guard agency, and then we transferred the garrison duty of Spratly Island from the ROC Marine Corps to the Coast Guard. So, one of the things that is quite curious is that if the same logic applies, that if we try to so-called, relieving this responsibility from the MND to the Coast Guard agency, and, precisely this law is about managing prohibited and restricted water, which is for, maritime policing efforts. If there's somehow sort of a emergency scenario or a contingency scenario that leads to a full escalation of conflicts between the two sides, then this doesn't apply anymore, because then we will be retracted back to the 1949 situation, where we are now officially in a conflict zone.
Okay, Julien, is there a parallel there that can be made between the Spratly Islands and what's happening, or potentially happening around Jim and Lianqiang?
What I see when I hear about this amendment, the spontaneous reaction is to fear what would happen in case of a conflict. The truth is that in case of a conflict, everybody comes up with their own interpretation anyway. We are entering the rule of force, and everybody will have a good reason and will have a way to twist whatever rules are there to justify whatever they're doing. That's what happens in any conflict. Now, my job is to talk about Taiwan to the world, and in terms of signaling, this is different. You talked before, just before, about Mark Rutte. This is a man who was Prime Minister of the Netherlands forever. They called him Teflon Mark. That's just how skilled he is. So when he talks to NATO, to the NATO public, and he finds a balance on reassuring some that NATO is active and reassuring some that NATO is not looking for war, etc., etc. So here, in terms of signaling, I think both sides in Taiwan needs to be careful what kind of image it gives to the world, and whatever the reasons are, making sure that there is a joint way to talk to the world that reassures everybody that this is not something that endangers Taiwan.
Raymond, I want to get your assessment on those.
I think the KMT needs to do a better job in explaining to our Taiwanese people and to our international audience why this proposal is necessary, and two fundamental flaws there. And if that's simply is about law enforcement, there's no need to, in the preamble of the proposal, to say that the two sides are still in the continuation of the Chinese Civil War. There's nothing relevant about that. That's totally redundant, and that statement is legally and factually wrong, actually, in our conclusion that in ending of the mobilization period and martial law, and Taiwan has already ended the Civil War period. There's no civil war legally in Taiwan. At least Taiwan doesn't see our status with China is about that. And also across Taiwan, and exchanges beyond peoples, both sides are based on peaceful conditions. There's no civil war continuing across Taiwan Strait. Second fundamental flaw is that the zone is about our sovereignty. The decision should be made by Taiwan unilaterally alone. There's anything that's maybe China has some opposition to that. We are independent and sovereign country. We made our own decision to declare unilaterally our own territorial waters and our own internal waters. So nothing about China. So those two fundamental flaws, I think the proponents of the proposal need to explain further.
Stephen, if you could explain, why reframe or why state that there's a civil war between China and the ROC?
Well, I just want to say, a lot of the fundamental flaws and everything is kind of interesting that they didn't entertain a question about Spratly Island's logic, right? So when it comes to civil war status and everything, right, let's look into the ROC Constitution for a little bit, right? It is a unilateral decision by the government during that time that believes it is not a timely manner to perhaps seek some sort of military conflict to resolve the Cross-Strait issue. But nevertheless, I have to remind a lot of people and also a lot of audience here, according to the Constitution of the Republic of China, we do not officially recognize the regime in Beijing as a sovereign country, right? Nevertheless, from our own constitutional perspective, it is still a domestic matter.
So you are saying the KMT's position is that the Taiwan Strait are the internal waters of this one China?
So for example, when it comes to internal waters, a lot of the fundamental issues and the worries by the governing minority is that does that hinder or does that interfere with, for example, foreign aids or foreign assistance to Taiwan during contingency? I don't believe so. For example, in UNCLOS, there's a lot of stated, for example, warships still enjoy a passage of innocence in internal waters and things like that. But the fundamentals, I believe, what Admiral Chen is trying to do for this sort of amendment is to try to make it into a situation where it fits the status quo, right? It fits the status quo where, interesting. I mean, I absolutely agree that, if the current government believes that we are not in a state of war, there's no civil war, then why is it the MND still is in charge of drawing these kind of waters instead of letting our Ocean Affairs Agency to do that kind of stuff, like the ones we did for Spratly Island?
Julien, if you can address the issue or the implications of the Taiwan Strait being internal waters, if that was the case, and also the Cross-Strait issue as being a civil war. What are the full implications of that? Or what are the most dangerous implications?
As somebody who used to report in a civil war zone, I can tell you that this country is definitely not in a civil war. I don't care about any kind of legal status. The day I will see here the kind of things I saw in the Congo, then it will be a civil war. Until that day, it is not. I don't have any time to discuss anything else.
Okay. Raymond, final word on this to you.
Okay. The main purpose for portraying the status quo, so-called the continuation of the Chinese Civil War, is in accordance to the Chinese narrative to say that the matter between Taiwan and China is their domestic affair or the so-called internal affair, so as to say that they should be enjoy a non-interference status from other powers. And that is not true. And that's against the universal understanding of the so-called status quo. May I remind you that the international community see the peace and security of across the Taiwan Strait as the status quo and opposes any unilateral attempts to change that by force or by coercion. So if that is a civil war, why does international society to endorse that? And besides that, the proposal by Admiral Chen has an internal conflict. If the Cross-Strait still are in civil war, why does the proposal say that Taiwan should negotiate with China? Why should law enforcement matter should be negotiated with your enemy of the civil war? You have the internal conflict between you, which cannot be reconciled.
I think one of the interesting thing is that sort of position on absolute terms, right? We are the enemies. We shouldn't really negotiate on anything else, right? Then, I don't believe that under the DPP government there should exist an entity so-called MAC. Right? If they are so-called the enemy and we refuse, for example, to engage in conversations with them, by the way, we have existing laws and regulations within our jurisdictional systems about the local governments and entities are not allowed, are prohibited to have any sorts of deals being done with the mainland without the approval of the central government of the MAC and also through legislative process, right? So I think it's very unfortunate that, you have a lot of people who are attempting to kind of politicize this issue.
Okay. Now, as part of his 10 Talks on the Country tour, President Lai Ching-te has called on Taiwanese who identify with the name Taiwan and those who choose to call the country by its official name, the Republic of China, ROC, to unite by, quote, opposing the Chinese Communist Party and safeguarding Taiwan. On the west of Taiwan, he said, you're not a real advocate of the ROC if you don't oppose the CCP, and you're not a real advocate of Taiwan if you don't safeguard Taiwan. In his first speech, President Lai had explained the history of Taiwan from ancient times in contrast to the narrative that China has pushed globally. Julien, let me ask you, so you're an independent journalist. What do you make of this particular campaign?
He is reacting to something that took his party, the DPP, by surprise, which is just how big the recall campaign is. They didn't see that coming. In the beginning, they didn't even think it would work. And now, actually, as we can see, it's going quite far. And so now he has to react to it, of course. And he has taken note of something that I reported on, because I saw it happen when I reported in the field, which is that a lot of people who identify with the ROC and who are, let's say, disaffected KMT voters are now joining the recall campaign. So, of course, it is logical for him in his position to react to it and to try to follow that narrative.
Mm-hmm. Raymond, so can we say essentially that the people who think of Taiwan as Taiwan, they generally are voters for the DPP, and those who identify Taiwan as the ROC generally are from the
No, I think that
okay.
the ordinary voter of Taiwan voted on domestic issues, but on the status of this nation, I think the most commonly shared common domination or understanding is that we are a country of our own. Mm-hmm. We are, no matter what's the official name, that we are not under Chinese rule.
Which is what the president's trying to do, to unite.
The president is trying to persuade to people that Taiwan ROC is an independent country, independent. We are not under the sovereignty of the PRC. By implication of that, they try to call the people to defend our own sovereignty, our own nationhood against the external power of the PRC. And also that, by implication, you also say that our legislature need to legislate for the interests of the people of Taiwan ROC rather than for the PRC. Mm-hmm. You are not going to make a legislative proposal to serve the interests of the PRC by saying that we should negotiate the PRC. That's a very clear case of this.
So in terms of Lai's campaign, we can see what he is trying to do. He's trying to unite disparate or the divisions. Would this, I mean, if the KMT was in power, a KMT president would also have to do the same thing. Would it be doing, he or she be doing the same thing as Lai?
I mean, the first thing, I think President Lai has done a horrible job in unifying this country. You know, on the one hand, the logic is a little bit flawed. On the one hand, he's calling for the unity of the Taiwanese society, but also at the same time, not recognizing or not trying to compromise and face the fact that he's a double minority government. And instead of reaching out towards the opposition leaders like Chen Shui-bian, like Tsai Ing-wen, like Ma Ying-jeou, and all the others before him, you know, he decided to do a lot of legal actions that continues to make the majority of the society to question the law.
So what sort of legal actions is that, Stephen?
So, for example, when it comes to the systematic so-called judicial punishment of the opposition party for attempting, for example, to combat this DPP-led recall campaign, I think it's very unfair given that we recently had this.
Sorry, I have to push back on that. Yeah. It's not a DPP.
So let me kind of clarify that. When the leader of the DPP's caucus in the Legislative Yuan on June the 20th, being asked the question by journalists, you can go search it on YouTube, says who initiated this grand campaign? The leader in Chinese, 不是我是谁? If it's not me, then who? So there is ample reason for the opposition to suspect that this is a DPP-led campaign. On the surface, it might seem like a civil-led effort, but we see a lot of footprints of the governing party trying to systematically oppress the opposition party. So when it comes to what a KMT would do differently, for example, we will be reaching out to the opposition to try to forge national unity that respects all the minority parties, right? You know, we will also make similar speeches with more historical accuracies. We don't go into the Ice Age. We don't skip certain major historical cases. And we certainly do not call or imply on other people when he uses the analogy of forging a sword to clear out the impurities of the others. We don't see a very serious efforts for the DPP to take political responsibilities when, for example, we witnessed one of the largest CCP espionage case happen in Lai's administration. We don't see the guy, for example, Joseph Wu, the Secretary General of the NSC, to take political responsibility. We don't see him to abide by the law of coming to report and be responsible to the legislative yuan.
Okay, let's get Julien's response to that. Was a lot
Well,
of
listen,
topics.
I didn't know that there was a man with magic power on the DPP. Apparently, the head of the caucus is a Jedi master. You just have to go like, you have to make a recall campaign. You know, like those are not the legislators you're looking for. And then suddenly, tens of thousands of people go in the street and make paper signs, etc. So I don't know what these footprints are. But as you got the idea, I talk about what I see and not talk about what I read on papers, and certainly I am not here to represent any kind of political parties, and I'm going to prove it to you right now. What I have also observed is that the DPP did a very bad job with domestic issues, with cost of living, and this is what costed them the legislature. This is what the KMT was elected for. So is it really a stretch of the imagination to think that Taiwanese people will be quite disappointed when they voted for people thinking they're going to lower the rent, and the first thing they do is keep on churning out law after law after law after law about sovereignty and state security. So we go to protest, we see it. We go to campaigns, and we see it. If there are footprints, it's going to have to be better than just one politician who at some point said something, because I don't care about what politicians say. I care about what politicians do.
Raymond, do you also want to respond?
The recall movement was endorsed and initiated by the civil, ordinary people. Majority of them are female. They have their own family, children, jobs, and they sacrifice their time for rest of office to campaign on the street. I think the KMT will do themselves a huge benefit to reflect on what issues, why the general population, majority of them in Taiwan, getting so angry about the agenda put forward.
Okay, let me give you some figures. Prosecutors have indicted 31 individuals affiliated with the KMT for allegedly forging thousands of signatures in recall campaigns targeting 3 Democratic Progressive Party DPP lawmakers. The KMT officials include a branch secretary, general party secretaries, and a chief executive officer. They face charges of document forgery and violations of the Personal Data Protection Act, according to prosecutors. Meanwhile, the Central Election Commission has confirmed 24 KMT lawmakers will face a recall vote on July 26th as part of a mass recall effort initiated by civic groups in 2024. No DPP lawmakers passed into the third round. The KMT currently holds 52 seats in Taiwan's 113-seat legislature, and together with the TPP, the other opposition party, which holds 8 seats, forms a majority bloc. The DPP holds 51 seats. So, Stephen, there needs to be enough public support in order to make the recalls succeed. So I think if you can address that issue.
Absolutely. So they kind of explain the numbers a little bit. So we got 3 stages when it comes to recall elections, right? So number 1, you need to pass a 1% petition, and then number 2, you need to pass a 10% petition. So when you get to the number 2 stage, is actually a little bit common given Taiwan is a very active and vibrant political society. You can motivate a lot of voters. And in these sort of districts, KMT legislators won not by a lot of margin, right? You still have DPPs who lost the election, but still have 30 to 40% or even close to 50% of support. So it's not hard, for them to kind of mobilize and encourage the people who used to vote for them to vote for this, right? I mean, after all, it's targeted
But the KMT
the
would be doing the same with the DPP lawmakers, surely.
So one of the things that I can kind of say is we have been very restrained. We have been trying to tell, as well as the TPP chairman, Huang Guochang, has been telling the government not to do this. And, the guy who I just mentioned, Ke Jianmin, he's not a simple politician. He's not just one politician. He's the longest serving legislator currently holding this record right now in the legislative end. He has always been the leader of the DPP caucus. So I listened to what he said. I listened to, a lot of the things that he had talked about when he commented on recall elections. So this is why we still hold such an opinion that this is a DPP-driven recall effort. And also, by the way, we see a lot of overlaps between the people who signed the first stage of the petition and the second stage of the petition, which is not supposed to happen. We cannot shake this suspicions when the caucus leader, DPP caucus leader Ke Jianmin, when he said the recall is going to happen on July 26th, and then it happened on July 26th.
Julien, can you address that issue? This is the final question. And then say how significant this development is in terms of any shift in the legislature, in terms of Taiwan's ability to, resist Chinese United Front activities.
Well, you see, we actually agree. As Stephen said, this is true. This is a society that has a long history now of political movements. This is the same country that did the White Lily movement, the Sunflower movement. You know, I come from Kaohsiung, right? Well, in Kaohsiung, there was also a big recall campaign. So again, it shouldn't surprise anybody that at some point the civil society here mobilizes itself. People in Taiwan are used to this kind of civic action. So you can suspect that there is a manipulation. You can look into it. Of course you can. And indeed, of course, why wouldn't some DPP politicians speak positively about it, since it's in their interest? But again, politicians talk, but what do they do? That's a different thing. So I don't see the need to have a big conspiracy behind that. And when I looked into it, I haven't seen it.
Raymond, I'll just give you the final question. So moving back to, what would any shift in the legislature mean for Taiwan in terms of China?
I think for our international audience, the recall movement is principles, the right given to our people under our constitution. And it's a reflection of the vibrancy and the resilience of our own democracy that people decide for themselves. That's a redress to strengthen, to redirect, to address our own democracy. So it's a healthy reflection of the livelihood of our own democracy. And people do feel that it's a necessary one. That's to fix the problems and go on. So let's wait and see.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much to all my guests, Julien Oeuillet, Raymond Sung, and Stephen Wang, for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe, and see you next time.